Galactic Council, mocked as human, inherits the king's rejected daughter. The grand chamber of the Galactic Council was filled with laughter representatives from different species. Sat in their golden chairs, their eyes fixed on the massive figure, standing in the center cane vitor of the drawn empire. Was one of the most powerful rulers in the galaxy. His people were known for their strength, their ruthless nature, and their love for war. But today the mighty king looked troubled. "I have a problem," Tur said, his deep voice going through the chamber. "A problem I wish to solve today." The council members leaned forward with curiosity. Volter was not a man who asked for help. If he had a problem, it had to be something serious. "My daughter Ara Tur continued, his expression dark. "She is weak. She is not like the other Draven. She lacks the warrior's spirit. She will never rule my kingdom. I no longer wish to be responsible for her," a low murmured. Spread across the chamber, some of the representatives exchanged amused glances. It was not uncommon for rulers to disown weak hairs, but doing it in front of the entire Galactic Council was unusual one. Of the council, members, a reptilian creature from the Zorak species, chuckled. "And what do you wish to do with her, King Balter? Surely, you cannot simply throw away your own daughter." Walter's lips curled into a smirk. "I will give her away," he said, "to anyone who will take her." The chamber erupted in laughter. The idea of a mighty Draven king giving away his daughter like an unwanted object was amusing to them, but no one actually wanted to take Ara, a drawn princess. Even a weak one would be a heavy burden. Then one of the council members spoke, with amusement in his voice. "Why not give her to the human?" The laughter grew louder. Everyone turned to look at a man sitting at the far end of the chamber. Ambassador Daniel Hayes, the only human representative, blinked in surprise. He had been quietly observing the meeting, not expecting to be dragged into this conversation. "Me?" Daniel asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yes, you," another council member said with a grin. "You humans love taking care of lost causes, don't you?" The laughter continued. Humans were one of the newest members of the Galactic Council. Many of the older species considered them weak, and unimportant. They had no great armies, no powerful warships, and no ancient traditions. Giving the human a Draven princess was a joke, a way to humiliate both Vitur and humanity. Daniel leaned back in his chair, thinking he could see the mockery in their eyes. They expected him to refuse to be insulted or to protest, but Daniel was not a fool. He understood politics, and he understood opportunities when he saw them. He stood up slowly. The room fell silent, waiting for his response. "I accept," Daniel said. For a moment no one spoke. Then the chamber exploded with laughter once more, but this time there was also shock. Walter's eyes narrowed. "You accept?" Daniel nodded. "Yes, I'll take responsibility for Princess Alara." The Draven king stared at him for a long moment. Then he let out a harsh laugh. "Fine, human, she is yours. Do whatever you want with her." With that, Tur turned and walked away, leaving the chamber with heavy footsteps. Daniel sat back down as the council continued to laugh, but he did not laugh with them. His mind was already working, thinking about what he had just done. He had taken in a Draven princess, an unwanted daughter of a warlord. It was supposed to be a joke, a humiliation, but Daniel had a feeling that this so-called joke might turn into something much more interesting, and perhaps, just perhaps, the galaxy would soon learn that humans were not as weak as they thought. Princess Ara sat in silence as the spaceship moved through the darkness of space. She had been taken from the grand halls of the Galactic Council and placed inside a simple human transport ship. It was small, nothing like the mighty warships of her people. There were no golden walls, no guards, no symbols of power. It felt empty. She glanced at the man sitting across from Her ambassador, Daniel, Hayes the human who had taken her, and he was not tall. Like the drawn warriors, he had no sharp claws, no glowing eyes, no heavy armor. He looked normal. Weak Alara clenched her fists. She had been humiliated in front of the entire Galactic Council. Her own father had given her away like an object. And this human had accepted her like she was some abandoned pet. She had spent her whole life being called weak, but this was the worst insult of all. Daniel noticed her glare, but said nothing. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. All right, he finally said, let's talk. Alara didn't respond. Daniel crossed his arms. Look, I know you're angry. I don't blame you, but let's be clear. I didn't take you in because I pity you. I took you in because I see potential. AA scoffed. Potential in me? Yes, Daniel's voice was calm. You may not be a warrior, but that doesn't mean you're useless. Your father made a mistake when he abandoned you, and I intend to prove that. AA frowned. Why do you care? Daniel leaned forward. Because I know what it's like to be underestimated. His eyes held no mockery, no amusement, just understanding. Humans were ignored when we first joined the Galactic Council. Everyone thinks we're weak, that we don't belong, but we survived and we adapted. And now I think you're in the same position. Era looked away. She wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but deep down she knew he had a point. The ship's automated voice interrupted the conversation. Arriving at Earth Space Station, Alara had never been to Earth before. She had heard of it, a small planet on the edge of the galaxy, home to a species that was often laughed at. She had never cared about humans before, but now she was one of them, whether she liked it or not. The ship landed smoothly, and the doors opened as Era stepped out. She expected to see something unimpressive. Instead, she found herself in a massive space station filled with humans working in perfect coordination. Ships of all sizes moved in and out, and large windows showed the blue planet below. Daniel noticed her expression. Surprised. AA quickly masked her reaction. It's functional. Daniel smirked. You'll see more soon. Come on. They walked through the station past groups of humans, talking, laughing, and working. Aura had never seen people act like this before. Draven were always disciplined, always serious, but these humans, they seemed relaxed. Where are we going? She finally asked. My home. Daniel said, I have a place on Earth where you can stay. You'll be safe there. Alara frowned. Safe? Do you think I am afraid? Daniel raised an eyebrow. No, but I think you've never had a place where you actually belong. AA didn't respond. After a short shuttle ride, they arrived at Daniel's home, a quiet house near the coast. The ocean stretched far into the horizon, its waves crashing gently against the shore. It was nothing like the Draven palaces. No guards, no walls, no heavy air filled with the smell of war machines. Era hesitated at the entrance. This is where I will stay for now. Daniel said, it's not a palace, but it's comfortable, and no one will treat you like a failure here. She stepped inside. The house was simple, but warm. A part of her, a very small part, felt relieved. Daniel set his bag down. You'll have your own room, but before you get too comfortable, we need to talk about what comes next. A lad turned to face him, and what is that? Daniel smiled slightly. Training. If you want to prove your father wrong, you'll need to learn how humans do things. Era narrowed her eyes. And why should I trust you? Daniel's expression didn't change. Because humans don't throw away the people they care about. For the first time in a long time, Alara had no reply. Alara sat on the balcony of Daniel's house, staring at the ocean. The waves moved in a steady rhythm, crashing against the shore and retreating again. It was peaceful, something she was not used to. Draven worlds were filled with the sounds of war machines, the echoes of training battles, and the shouts of warriors. Silence was rare, and peace was even rarer. She didn't know what to think of this place. It had been 2 days, since she arrived on Earth Daniel had given her space, allowing her time to adjust. He didn't treat her like a child, nor did he treat her like a burden. He simply let her be. It was strange. A part of her had expected him to use her as some kind of trophy, a way to gain favor in the Galactic Council. Another part of her had feared that he would treat her like her father did, like an embarrassment, but he had done neither. She heard footsteps behind her. She didn't turn around. "You've been out here all morning," Daniel said. He leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, thinking about something. Era finally looked at him. "I don't understand." He humans, Daniel smirked. "Most aliens don't." She ignored his joke. "Your people are strange. You do not seek power, yet you do not fear those who have it. You do not conquer, yet you do not bow. My father and the Galactic Council laugh at humans, but you act as if it does not matter. Why?" Daniel sighed and walked over to sit beside her. "Because we've learned that strength isn't always about war." Ara frowned. "Then what is it about?" Daniel looked out at the ocean. "Survival, adaptation, unity." He glanced at her. "The galaxy thinks humans are weak because we don't fight like the Draven or the Zorks, but strength isn't just about how hard you can hit. It's about how well you can survive, how fast you can learn, and how much you can change." AA considered his words. She had spent her whole life hearing that strength was about power, about dominance. Her father had made sure she understood that only the strong could rule, and yet here was a species that did not rule, did not conquer, yet continued to grow. She crossed her arms. "You think I can chain?" Daniel smiled. "I know you can." Ola looked away. "And what if I don't want to?" Daniel shrugged. "Then you stay the way you are. But tell me, Alara, do you want to spend the rest of your life proving your father right, or do you want to show him he made a mistake?" Alara's jaw tightened. She hated her father for what he had done. He had thrown her away, humiliated her in front of the entire Galactic Council. She had spent her whole life being told she was weak, and now she had a choice. She looked at Daniel. "What do you expect me to do?" Daniel stood up. "First, I expect you to stop feeling sorry for yourself." Our eyes narrowed. "Excuse me?" "You heard me." Daniel said. "You've spent the last 2 days sitting here thinking about how unfair everything is. I get it, you've been treated badly, but you can either keep thinking about it or do something about it." Ala felt anger rise inside her. "And what do you suggest?" Human Daniel smirked. "Training." AA scoffed. "You think you can train me?" Drawn Daniel shrugged. "You're not just a Draven anymore. You're under my care now, and humans do things differently." Ala folded her arms. "I doubt you have anything to teach me." Daniel's smirk didn't fade. "We'll see about that. Meet me outside in an hour." Alara hesitated. Every part of her wanted to refuse, but something in Daniel's confidence made her pause. He was not a warrior, yet he acted as if he knew something she didn't. She sighed. "Fine." Daniel nodded. "Good, let's see how strong you really are." As he walked away, Ara looked back at the ocean for the first time in her life. She felt something strange. Hope. Ara stood in the open field behind Daniel's house, her arms crossed, as she watched him set up strange training equipment. The sky was clear, the wind was gentle, and in the distance, she could hear the sound of ocean waves. It was not the kind of training ground she was used to back on. Drea training was brutal. Warriors were thrown into battle simulations from childhood. Strength was tested through combat, pain, and endurance, but here there were no weapons, no warriors, no threats, just Daniel, a few metal bars, and some weighted objects. "This is ridiculous," she muttered. Daniel glanced at her with the smirk. "That's what you think now. Give it a few minutes." He stood in front of her and clapped his hands. "All right, first lesson: human training isn't just about muscles or fighting skills. It's about balance, speed, endurance, and control. Strength means nothing if you can't use it properly." Ala scoffed. "Draven are born warriors. We don't need balance games." Daniel didn't argue, instead he pointed. At a pull-up bar. All right then, show me your strength. 10 pull-ups. AA rolled her eyes but stepped forward. She grabbed the bar and pulled herself up with ease. She could do this in her sleep, but as she reached the 5th pull-up, something felt off. Her arms were strong, but movement felt different. She was using raw power instead of controlled effort. She finished the 10 and dropped to the ground, crossing her arms there. What now? Daniel grinned. Now do it again, but this time use the right muscles. AA frowned. I just didn't know you used brute strength. That's different from technique. If you keep using only power, you'll burn out fast. Daniel smirked. Then prove it. Do 20. This time Aura huffed, but grabbed the bar again. She started pulling herself up, but by the time she reached 15, she felt strain in her muscles. By 18, her arms were shaking. She gritted her teeth, refusing to give up. She forced herself to finish 20, then dropped down, breathing heavily. Daniel crossed his arms, tired. Era glared at him. No, Daniel chuckled. Good. Then let's move on for the next hour. Daniel led her through different exercises: ease, running, jumping, lifting weights, balancing on one foot, dodging small moving targets, things that felt strange and useless to her warrior mind. But as she continued, she began to realize something. She was strong, but her strength was unfocused. She could hit hard, but her movements were inefficient. She could run fast, but she tired too quickly. Daniel, despite being physically weaker, moved with precision. His endurance was impressive, and his reactions were sharp. He wasn't just training her body, he was training her control. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Daniel called for a break. Aura sat on the ground, breathing heavily. You're not bad, Daniel admitted, but you rely too much on raw power. Strength is important, but without control, it's useless. Alara wiped sweat from her forehead. Draven do not fight with tricks. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Then maybe that's why your father thought you were weak. Alara's eyes flashed with anger, and she shot up to her feet. What did you say? Daniel didn't back down. Your father only values brute strength. He never taught you how to fight smart. He never taught you that a real warrior is more than just muscles and rage. Alara clenched her fists. You think I don't know how to fight. I think you know how to hit things. Daniel corrected, but that's not the same as knowing how to win. AA stared at him, breathing hard. His words stung, but deep down she knew he wasn't wrong. She had always struggled in traditional drawn combat. She was strong, but she lacked the aggression and instinct of her people. That was why her father had abandoned her. Daniel sighed and placed a hand on her shoulder. I'm not saying you're weak. Al, I'm saying you've been trained the wrong way. If you want to prove your father wrong, you need to stop fighting like a Draven and start fighting like yourself. Alara looked away, her jaw tight. She hated to admit it, but Daniel's training was different from anything she had experienced, and despite her frustration, she was learning. Finally, she exhaled and looked at him. Fine. What's next? Daniel grinned. Now, we see how well you handle a real challenge. Alara straightened to challenge. Daniel pointed toward the ocean. You're going to swim across the bay. Alara's eyes. Why didn't you want me to swim? Daniel nodded. Yep, humans aren't the strongest species in the galaxy, but we survive because we learn how to adapt. And if you want to train with me, you'll have to adapt too. Aura looked at the water, then back at Daniel. He was testing her, seeing if she would quit. She clenched her fists and stepped toward the shore. She was not going to lose to a human, not today. Aura stood at the edge of the shore, staring at the vast ocean stretching before her. The water was calm, reflecting the bright sun. Above, the idea of swimming across the bay felt ridiculous. Draven didn't train in water. They trained on land, in the air, or in zero gravity, but never in the sea. She turned to Daniel. This is pointless. Daniel smirked. That's what you said about the other exercises, and yet here you are. Aura clenched her fists. She didn't like how confident he was, as if he knew something she didn't. She hated to admit it, but Daniel's training was pushing her in ways she had never experienced before. Her body ached from the previous exercises, but she wasn't going to back down now. She stepped into the water. It was cold, but she ignored it. Taking a deep breath, she pushed forward, letting the water rise up to her waist. Daniel walked beside her. All right, here's the deal. You need to swim from here to that floating platform. He pointed to a structure in the distance, bobbing gently in the water. It's not far. Maybe a few 100 meters. Aura frowned. And if I sink? Daniel grinned. And then I fish you out. She glared at him, but said nothing. Instead, she took another step forward until the water reached her chest. She had seen how humans swam before. It seemed simple enough. Kick your legs, move your arms, and stay afloat. Taking a deep breath, she pushed off the ground and tried to move forward. She immediately sank. Panic shot through her. As water rushed over her head, she kicked wildly, trying to regain balance, but her movements were uncoordinated. The ocean didn't care about strength. It swallowed her without hesitation. Before she could sink further, a strong hand grabbed her arm and pulled her up. She gasped for air. As she resurrected, coughing and sputtering, Daniel held her steady. All right, he said, his voice calm. Lesson 1: strength doesn't matter here. It's about technique. You can't fight the water. You have to move with it. Aura coughed again, wiping her face. You planned this, didn't you? Daniel chuckled. Maybe. She gritted her teeth. He was enjoying this too much, but she wasn't going to quit. Daniel guided her back to a shallower part of the water. Okay, let's try again this time. Relax, use slow, controlled movements. You don't need to overpower the water, just work with it. Clara took a deep breath. She hated feeling out of control, but she forced herself to listen slowly. She tried again, mimicking the way she had seen humans swim. She kicked her legs and moved her arms in wide, sweeping motions. This time she stayed afloat. She wasn't moving fast, but she wasn't sinking either. Daniel nodded. Good, now keep going. She gritted her teeth and pushed forward. Every movement felt awkward, every stroke unnatural, but step by step she made progress. The floating platform was still far away, but she wasn't going to stop. Minutes passed. Her muscles burned. Her breathing was heavy, but she refused to quit. Daniel swam beside her, keeping pace. Not bad, he said. You're learning. Aura didn't answer. She was too focused. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she reached the platform. She grabbed the edge and pulled herself up, collapsing onto the surface. She was exhausted, soaked, and sore, but she had done it. Daniel climbed up beside her and sat down. He smiled. See, told you, it wasn't impossible. Alara took deep breaths, staring at the sky. That was terrible. Daniel laughed. Yeah, but you did it. She glanced at him. He wasn't mocking her. He wasn't looking at her like she was a failure. He was proud. For the first time in her life, someone had pushed her. Not to break her, but to make her stronger. She closed her eyes and let out a small, tired laugh. Maybe humans weren't as weak as the galaxy believed. Maybe, just maybe, they had something to teach her. After all, Aura sat on the floating platform, her muscles aching from exhaustion. The water still dripped from her clothes, and her breathing was heavy. But despite the pain, there was a strange sense of satisfaction in her chest. She had done it. She had crossed the bay. Daniel sat beside her, resting his arms on his knees. The ocean stretched around them, calm and endless. The sun reflected off the water, creating a golden shimmer across the waves. You did good, Daniel said. Alara scoffed. I almost drowned. Daniel smir. But you didn't. She turned to look at him. You planned all of this, didn't you? You knew I would struggle. Daniel shrugged. Of course. That was the point. Alara narrowed her eyes. You enjoy seeing me fail? Daniel shook his head. No, I enjoy seeing you learn. She looked away, her mind deep in thought, back on Travia. Failure was Weakness if you couldn't do something perfectly. You were mocked if you showed struggle. You were seen as lesser, but Daniel was different. He wasn't shamming her. He wasn't laughing at her like the Galactic Council had when her father cast her aside. He was teaching her, and even more surprising, he believed in her. Daniel stretched his arms. All right, time to head back. Era groaned. You expect me to swim again? Daniel grinned. Unless you want alive. On this platform, forever, she sighed, pushing herself to her feet. Her arms felt heavy, her legs weak, but she wasn't going to complain. She had already proven she could do it once. She would do it again. With a deep breath, she jumped back into the water. This time, she didn't sink. The swim back was just as difficult, but she could already feel the difference. Her strokes were more controlled, her breathing more steady. She wasn't just using strength, she was using skill. By the time she reached the shore, she was exhausted, but she felt something new inside her. Pride. She collapsed onto the sand, staring up at the sky. Daniel sat down next to her, tossing her a bottle of water. So he said was that a useless exercise. AA took a long drink before answering. It was different. Daniel chuckled. That's human training for you. She turned her head to look at him. Your people are strange. You train not just for war, but for survival. You fight, but you do not conquer. You struggle, but you do not break. Daniel nodded. That's why the galaxy underestimates us. Era thought about that. The Galactic Council saw humans as weak because they didn't seek war, but maybe, just maybe, strength wasn't about war. Maybe it was about endurance. She sighed. All right, human. What's next? Daniel grinned. Now we test your speed. Alara groaned. I hate you. Daniel laughed. You'll thank me later. Alara doubted that, but as she stood up, ready for the next challenge, she realized something. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like a failure. And that was worth everything. Ara stood on the sandy shore, her muscles still aching from the swim. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the ground. A cool breeze moved through the trees, rustling the leaves. It was a peaceful evening, but she knew peace never lasted long with Daniel around. She turned to face him, arms crossed. You said we're testing speed. What exactly do you have in mind? Daniel grinned and pointed down the stretch of beach. Simple os, from here to that rock formation over there. He gestured toward a group of large boulders standing at the far end of the shore, at least a kilometer away. No tricks, no weapons, just running. Ara frowned. Running was part of Draven training, but it was always done with heavy armor in harsh conditions or in battle simulations. A simple foot race seemed almost childish. She smirked. You really think you can beat me? Daniel stretched his legs and rolled his shoulders. You're faster in short bursts, but let's see how well you handle endurance running. Ara narrowed her eyes. She had already learned the hard way that Daniel's training had purpose. He wasn't just testing speed, he was testing stamina. Fine, she would prove she was faster. She moved into position beside him. All right, human, let's do this. Daniel nodded. On my count 3, 2, 1, go. AA took off like a bullet. The moment her feet hit the sand, she surged forward with powerful strides, her long legs covering distance quickly. She felt the wind against her face, the sand kicking up behind her. She glanced back and smirked. Daniel was already falling behind. Pathetic. She pushed herself harder, her Draven instincts telling her to dominate the competition. She could already see the rock formation getting closer. This was going to be easy. But then something strange happened. Her breathing became uneven. Her legs started to feel heavy. The sand, which had felt solid at first, was now shifting beneath her feet, slowing her down. She frowned. This wasn't normal. She was stronger than this. Then she heard footsteps. Daniel. She turned her head and saw him running steadily, his pace unchanged. He wasn't fast, but he wasn't slowing down. His breathing was controlled, his movement sufficient. Alla gritted her teeth and tried to speed up again, but her legs refused to listen. She had used too much energy at the start, and now she was burning out Daniel past her Alara's. Eyes widened in shock. He wasn't running faster, she was getting slower. She forced herself to keep going, but by the time she reached the rock formation, Daniel was already there, leaning against a boulder. Barely out of breath, she stumbled to a stop, gasping for air. How did you? Daniel grinned, packing. She glared at him. What? He stretched his arms. You sprinted too fast at the start, used up all your energy. I kept a steady pace. That's why I won. Alara clenched her fists. That wasn't a fair test. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Why? Because you lost. She opened her mouth to argue, but stopped. He was right. She had lost because she had underestimated endurance. She had relied on power, thinking speed alone would win. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to calm down. So what's the lesson? Daniel smiled. Speed isn't just about running fast. It's about lasting long enough to reach the finish line. A warrior who burns out is as useless as one who's too slow. Ara sighed. Another lesson, another weakness expose. But instead of frustration, she felt something else, determination. She looked at Daniel again. He raised an eyebrow. You sure? She nodded. This time I won't lose. Daniel smirked. All right, then let's race, and this time she would win the right way. AA stood at the starting point. Once again her eyes locked onto the distant rock formation. The cool evening air brushed against her face, but she barely noticed. Her mind was focused this time. She wouldn't make the same mistake. Daniel stretched beside her, a confident smirk on his face. So you think you've learned the lesson? Perera nodded, packing. Daniel chuckled. Good, let's see if you can apply it. She took a deep breath, her muscles still aching from the first race. But she pushed the pain aside. Losing was not an option. Daniel raised a hand. All right, 3, 2, 1, go. This time Alara didn't sprint. She started with a strong but controlled pace, keeping her breathing steady. Daniel ran beside her, his expression calm, his movements relaxed. The sand was still a challenge, shifting beneath her feet, but she adjusted her stride. She wasn't trying to dominate the race in the first few seconds. She was running smart. Halfway to the rock formation, she felt a difference. Her legs were still strong, her lungs not yet burning. Daniel was still next to her, but she wasn't falling behind. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just relying on raw power. She was using strategy. A small smile formed on her lips. Then Daniel suddenly picked up speed. Alara's eyes widened. He had been holding back. He wasn't just teaching her packing, he was testing her ability to adapt. She gritted her teeth. She wouldn't let him win. She took a deep breath, pushed harder, and matched his speed. Step by step, they ran side by side. The rock formation was getting closer. Daniel glanced at her, a hint of surprise. Eyes in his eyes. Not bad. Alara smirked. Not losing the last stretch was the hardest. Her muscles burned, her breath was ragged, but she didn't slow down. With one final push, they both reached the rock formation at the same time, their feet hitting the ground in unison. Aura bent over, hands on her knees, gasping for air. Daniel chuckled. That's more like it. She looked at him, sweat dripping down her forehead. I won. Daniel smirked. We tied. Alara let out a short laugh. Next time I'll win. Daniel nodded. That's the spirit. She collapsed onto the sand, staring up at the darkening sky. The twin moons of this world had begun to rise, casting a silver glow over the landscape. For the first time she felt something unfamiliar, yet comforting. Growth. Daniel sat beside her, tossing her a water bottle. You're improving. AA took a long drink. Because of you. Daniel shrugged. Because you refused to quit. She sighed, feeling exhaustion settle into her bones. What's next? Daniel smiled. Tomorrow we test your instincts. AA closed her eyes. She didn't know what that meant, but she was ready. She wasn't just training anymore, she was evolving, and in the galaxy had no idea What was coming? The stars twinkled in the night sky. As Arara sat on the shore, staring at the calm waves, the air was cool, and the gentle sound of the ocean filled the silence. Daniel sat beside her, arms resting on his knees. "You did well today," he said, breaking the quiet awe. Smirked, "Of course. I did. I beat you." Daniel chuckled. "That you did." He turned to face her, but the real lesson wasn't just about running. It was about understanding your limits and learning how to push past them without breaking yourself. AA thought about that. For a moment, she had always been trained to fight at full power, to dominate quickly, and never show weakness, but Daniel had taught her something different: control, patience, endurance. For the first time in her life, she felt like she had truly grown. She sighed. "It's strange. When I was Andrea, I was nothing more than a problem, to be ignored." The Galactic Council laughed when my father cast me aside, and now here I am being trained by a human. Daniel nodded. "Funny how life works." Ala turned to him. "Why are you helping me? You could have left me alone." "You had no reason to train me." Daniel shrugged. "Because I see potential in you." AA raised an eyebrow. "Potential, Ishal?" He nodded. "You're stubborn, strong, and willing to learn. Most people would have given up after the first failure, but you kept pushing forward. That's what makes a difference." Ola looked down at her hands. She had never thought of herself that way before. All her life, she had only seen what she lacked, but now, for the first time, she saw what she could become. She clenched her fists. "Then I won't stop. Here I want to keep learning, keep training. I want to be stronger." Daniel smiled. "Good, because we're just getting started." A comfortable silence settled between them. The night was peaceful, but Alara knew the real challenges were still ahead. She wasn't just the unwanted daughter of a drawn king anymore. She was something more, and she would make sure the galaxy knew it. The end.